Good evening, everybody. I'm Michael Tabman. Welcome back to Crimes and Times. And as always, I want to thank everybody for their continued support. A lot of you have been subscribing to our YouTube channel. Please keep doing that. We're trying to hit that 100-person mark so we can increase the number of platforms we're on. And our audience keeps growing every night, number of subscribers, and the questions that keep coming in. So thank you very much. Tonight's episode, I think we're just going to call it Bad Boys. We're going to have a couple of really bad boys on the show and a couple of not so bad boys. Hopefully you'll know the difference. Joining us will be Joe Loya, who has a criminal history he's going to share with us, and these are reformed criminals we will have on tonight. And joining us as my co-host tonight is Howard Kurtz. He's a sociologist and a criminologist, and more importantly, he was my professor when I was pursuing my master's degree many, many years ago. Welcome, gentlemen. Thank you for being on the show.
It's good to be here. Thank you for having us.
Thank you. Joe, give us a little background, about your childhood, growing up, kind of leading to what led you into a life of crime. And then I want to kind of talk about your entree into crime, how it fell out, how it fell apart, but how, all the things that involved, your planning, your state of mind, and then we'll get to what you're doing now. So take us back to your childhood and the things you remember that kind of led you to where you decided to go into crime.
Well, yeah, I feel like I needed to get prepared to become the kind of person who would, jump to the other side of taboo. And there was a lot of things that happened to me that blurred the lines for me. One of them clearly was the death of my mother at age 9. When I was 9, she died. She died for 2 years slowly, painfully of a kidney disease. And watching people moralize around her death and watching people try to help me deal with my grief was pathetic. I mean, I would cry and I would say, "Don't cry. She's not here. You don't need to feel that grief. She's in heaven. Don't cry." And I wasn't allowed to feel what was actually very natural because people had this idea that I should be something else, do something else with the grief. So I shoved all that down. I was taught how to shove that down. I was raised in a home where, in East Los Angeles, where I needed to test my manhood. If I got beat up by bullies, my dad would put me in the car, we'd go find them, and he'd have me fight them so that I wouldn't, I could recover my honor. So there was this, and there was the brutality in the home. And I don't mean like a general, slapped around, hit, whatever, generally what I thought everybody when we were growing up kind of experienced back in the 60s and 70s. I'm talking that stuff that eventually would have got my dad taken us out of the home and put in courts because of the brutality of it. In fact, it got so brutal at age 16. He was beating me so badly that when he left at one point and I had this big concussion, I went to the room and put my brother in the bathroom. I got a steak knife. I put it on the pillow and I waited for him to come back. And when he came back, I did retaliate. I stabbed him in the neck. I tried to kill him. At 16, I thought a neck shot was a kill shot, but he survived. And I ran out of the house with my brother. We were taken into county custody, and he, like I said, he lived. But what was most important about that is that I now know what it was like to recover some power, to make victims. Poof, man, I felt good. It was the first time that I witnessed that I was different. And then when I went to McLaren Hall, where all these abused kids were, all going into foster care, none of them were retaliated. None of them. I was the only one. And that set me apart already in my mind, because you have to have a sort of grandiosity to be a criminal. You have to think you're better than everyone and everyone's rules are stupid or whatever. And this was leading towards that, because not only now did I have access to my rage as a brutalized person. Now, I want to say this one thing. Never once blamed my father for my crime spree. Let's just get that out of the way. I'm not a person who believes my dad is responsible for me becoming a criminal. What my dad's responsible for me doing is turning people into abstractions. Pawns on the table that I can move around, and I didn't care about what they were feeling. And my dad also altered my imagination about how good it felt to get hit in the mouth. How good it felt to turn somebody into a victim. He introduced me to that concept when he would take me out to go fight, and when I would have force me to fight because I was a nerdy little bookish kid who got bullied a lot.
Interesting.
And he wanted me to be a tough
Joe,
guy.
let me get Howard to jump in here. Howard, we just heard a lot of what I would call a profile, almost of a criminal waiting to happen. What's your thoughts on what you just heard about Joe's background, his dad, and how he felt when he actually retaliated?
Sure. Well, obviously, we expect parents to allow children to feel safe. That's the number one thing I think a parent is supposed to do. and to show you some kind of empathy. And I think to also prepare you for the world, but to prepare you for a world that you're not going to be in a fist fight every day, right? So obviously that set the stage for some some really serious, as I'm listening to you, right, for some serious changes in the way you view the world. And I think the fact that you said you were the only one in care that actually fought back, that's a very liberating thing to be able to do that. But I think at such an early age, and to have to feel like you had to fight back so violently, is significant. I'm sorry you had to go through that.
I appreciate that. But what also did to me psychologically, I think you might find this interesting, is like I said, I was a bookish kid. My dad was actually a preacher. And I read a lot of theology and philosophy growing up because my dad was when I was in junior high, my dad was actually getting his degree in classics and philosophy from UCLA. So we used to go and hang out there. I would see him talking to his professors. I had a love for philosophy and theology. And I thought for a while I was going to either be a theologian or a lawyer because I love language. I love to argue. I love to think, squeeze meaning out of everything. But so what this did when I went to McLaren Hall, it altered me in a different way. It made me feel like, oh, there's the people who don't fight back, who are the sheep, and then there's me. And I'm like, I took on this idea that I'm like the Promethean criminal. I'm like the Ubermensch. Like I'm better than not only am I better than society in general, I belong in a class of people who feel like all you peons, I'm supposed to step over you. I have more power. I have access to this violence now. I have access. I try to kill my father. And I'm not trying to go back home. Everyone in McLaren Hall, even though they've been rescued out of terribly violent things, burnt children, broken ribs, acid on some kids' faces, children in the homes, and all the kids got taken away. All that stuff that you guys are familiar with that happens in terrible crimes against kids. They would cry at night to go back home. They wanted the safety and comfort of bondage, and I was like, man, give me the anxiety of emancipation. I don't know what's out there, and it's scary, but I'm going to go find my way. And so what I took out into the world was the thing that I'm better than everyone. All of you don't know anything. I know behind the scenes, all of you are the kind of people under duress, you'll run back to bondage. I'm not. I'm going to be the Promethean criminal, the guy who like goes and steals fire from God and gives it to everyone. I'm going to be that guy, the criminal. So philosophically, I was giving myself an understanding that, because I wasn't into drugs. I've never used drugs. I don't like drugs. I see drugs as a weakness. So I was never driven to crime to support a habit. In fact, I had such contempt when I went to prison. I saw these guys who admired, and they would bring drugs on their prison tier, and these guys would turn into the weakest, the kind of people who I just didn't like. I just didn't like how the addiction took over, right? So I wasn't drug driven, but what I was driven because of the poverty of my childhood. I wanted money. I wanted to go grab money as much as possible. And I thought, I'm going to go make a lot of money. And this is the Promethean, the Ubermensch kind of thinking with me. When I went to college, I was like, so what am I going to do? I'm going to get out in 4 years and get a job for $40,000. I'm a bright guy. I'll get a good job. I'll probably get $50,000. Screw that. Why don't I take this power I have in me, the thing that marshaled my will, when I was beaten, broken rib, and that day that I stabbed my dad, by the way, on the hospital that night, I had a fractured elbow and a fractured rib. I was like, I took my broken little body, I picked up that knife, I tried to kill him. I can marshal my will in a way. Why don't I do that to make money? And because I was a kind of lazy and opportunistic and impulsive because of the kind of unstable childhood I was raised in, I was confused and desperate. But I wanted to overlay some intelligence to it, so I'm like, you know what? I need to just go and do what other people can't do. I'll use my intelligence, I'll use my wit, I'll use my strength, and I'll go make a lot of money by going into crime. So I was trying to justify my laziness, right?
Yeah, but so when you got out of the school, so Joe, when you got out of the school, you got out of this house, I guess, because you were a minor. Were you just set free on the world, or where'd you go and how old were you?
No, what happened actually when we went into McLaren home, McLaren Hall. We went there, and I was eventually put in a foster care family. And I went back my senior year. I stabbed my dad my junior year. I went back my senior year because my dad was so contrite, and I still had that Christian ethos, right? But this thing was building inside of me. This thing was churning, and I knew when I finally graduated high school and I went to go do junior college at first, That's when I started thinking, what am I doing this thing for? This is for schmucks. These are for the kids who who went to McLaren Hall and cried because they wanted bondage. I don't need to feed into this line of safety and moving forward and what's socially acceptable. Already the sociopath in me was really starting to wake up. Like, wait, this one path, not for me. That's a loser's path. I can go and try to do something that will make me $50,000 in a week, which was interesting because one day I actually woke up to rob banks, and I literally was like, "Don't come back to make $50,000." That was an interesting sum. From 50,000 was like what I thought the average person made in the industry. You know, the late the 80s, or the early 80s. I thought that's what I would make. So 50,000 was a number. I thought I want to make that in a day. I don't want to be the guy who makes that in a year. And so that's eventually what drove me into crime, was this compulsion not to work, not to be like everybody else, to go my own route. My dad would say, you need to do college. And I would say, Steve Jobs didn't do college. like I thought I was going to be Steve Jobs, but I was looking to hang myself, hang my identity on great people. I thought my criminality was a kind of greatness. I'm telling you, I was classic criminal. As much as, at the time I thought it was really elite or something, or was going to turn myself into an elite criminal because I had this intelligence. I was an average criminal, and that my grandiosity was off the charts. My confusion, my desperation, all that drove me, just like the dope fiend. The anger, the rage consumed me, so I didn't see things clearly, and I didn't care about people. I didn't know how to make connections.
So let's take that feeling there. Let's take that feeling. So, and what was the first crime you started thinking about committing? What was your first serious crime?
Oh man, I don't even want to talk about my first series. I'm embarrassed about it. Oh. So
that's what we're here for, man.
I was desperate for my. No, I'll tell you. I don't mind telling you. It's in my book. I wrote a memoir about it. I mean, that's the one thing that I'm very honest about, because I think a lot of ex-criminals try to come out. I mean, I did a lot of things that gave me cachet in the criminal world. I ran with a bunch of serious guys. I did a lot of serious on time in the hole for investigation of serious crime. I ran with those crowds. But in the beginning, I was a guy who had no access to the criminal world. I wasn't in a gang. I didn't know dope fiends. I didn't know dope dealer. I didn't have the ways that people usually wedge themselves in there. I had to figure out how to do it. So I was working at a restaurant, and I needed money because my bills were piling up, and I would just have too much debt. And it wasn't a lot of debt, but I just, I was having debt because I would borrow from Peter to pay Paul, kind of thing, right? It was, like I said, impulsive. So I had a manager, and he was like a manager / friend. I had worked with him at another restaurant, and he invited me up to Santa Barbara to work. And I stole his car. He gave me a key to go pick up some stuff for work. And when he gave me the key to his car, a little crappy car, it's not even like it was an important car. He gave me the keys to his car, and I made a copy of the key. And then when I brought the car back, I gave him his key. And hey, okay, well, I got to go now. And I quit work. I left work. And I got in his car, and I drove down to LA. And I was going to try and sell the car just to get cash. They found it a block away from my aunt's house. And it just parked there overnight. Everyone assumed that I was the one who had taken it. I was sketchy, but like a good average criminal. I was unaware. I had no self-awareness of how sketchy the vibe I was giving off to everyone. So I thought I was clever, and I didn't get away with it. And the next day, I went to rob another car, to drive up there to tell them, hey, I'm here, going back to work. What happened? Oh, your car got stolen. I was going to pull that stupid move. And I literally I strong-arm robbed the keys out of a woman's car who had to have been 6 years old. Just pulled her keys out, got in the car when she was coming out of the supermarket. Somebody had the presence of mind behind me as I was pulling away to puncture my tire. So the car ended up losing, the tire got flat about half mile away. So I just ditched the car on the freeway and, climbed a wall over the freeway and eventually made my way back up to Santa Barbara from LA. And everyone knew I was guilty. I felt contrite. I felt terrible. And I ended up doing, because it was my first crime ever, and I had been somebody who showed no criminal history. I wasn't drugs. It was, a good, bad crime. I got 3 years probation, and and I did 90 days, 90 days in the county, and then 3 years probation.
Let me ask you a question now.
Howard,
I'd like to jump in here. Joe's showing a little contrition here at this point. He's saying he felt bad about taking this woman's car, given everything that happened. What's your observation on that, Howard?
Well, you mentioned kind of a almost a Christian background growing up.
Yeah.
And I think, for people that are raised in any type of Christian background where there's physical abuse, it creates such a contradiction. You want to be good. You want to be as great as you can be. You want to be,
holy. You want to be holy.
Yeah, you want to be holy. You want to be at the top of the heap of goodness, if you can call it that. But at the same time, the people who are supposed to be your caregivers, who are supposed to make you feel, secure and guide you, they're being abusive. And so the contradiction is so great, I think, that you always have that feeling, that feeling where maybe you could be redeemed at some point. And that's a good feeling, right? But at the same time, I think that encourages people, especially young people, to look at the everyday Joe who's going to work and, doing it the right way and going to class or whatever it is he's trying to accomplish, and to see it as a kind of a hollow promise, that because that is what it was. It sounds like in your instance, that there you were, I'm sure, a kid that just wanted to be like other kids, but yet you're getting this abuse. And anytime you're in that circumstance, it creates so much tension that, and I can't speak to, the depths of the abuse that you've experienced, but it sounds like it was pretty serious for you to, resort to that type of violence.
It was a sadism of a sort. Yeah, I think you're saying something very interesting because, there's again, I'm not blaming my father, but he did that. Parents are supposed to shape your moral compass, and mine was just wacky. It was just I couldn't find any true north, I was really running, and you see it a lot. I've come out and I've worked a lot with ex-offenders and people who are addicts, who were kind of accidental criminals. They became criminals because their addiction drove them to have to go commit crime. And they were not philosophically like me, kind of committed to the idea of crime and the philosophy of crime. They actually were just they needed to go fix. What's interesting is when I get around them and they got this real sketchy vibe. I think one of the reasons I had so much contempt for dope fiends when I was a criminal is they reminded me constantly of what I felt like in my early 20s trying to become a criminal, just confused and nervous and not feeling stable and what we would call sketchy. And so, but the other thing too about my dad, what was important about the contrition part is remember too, a lot of people who do go to prison, when they do turn their lives over, the real sort of moral layout that they have is religion. And so because I wasn't a hardcore criminal yet, because I hadn't committed myself entirely to crime, nobody in the criminal community had embraced me. My connection to crime was tenuous. So when the owner of the car says to me, I'm not going to press charges, just answer a couple questions for me, I actually felt like this real sense of empathy from him as my friend / boss, that he was trying to help me. And because I had done this terrible thing to this older woman, which violated my conscience, and now he was giving me this mercy. It made me feel like I gotta lean into the life. Like you see all those people in those revivals, their hands are up. They're just like feeling all this emotion around their morality. And I felt like I needed to come straight with this guy, and I did. I answered the questions he wanted. He didn't press charges, but I ended up doing time for the crime against the woman. But later, it would take a little bit of time for me to harden that part of me, and it wasn't very long before I started saying, screw all that contrition, man. That's nonsense, man. I can't stop who I am. I can't stop being. I can't change who I am inside. I can't it's too late to close the barn up when the horse had been let out. I have to have rage. I have to rage. I am a man now who rages, is what I told myself.
So Joe, you're right, and you're telling yourself that. When I'm hearing, sort of as a little, talking yourself into what you want to believe, giving yourself sort of a reason to go further.
Yeah.
So where did you go from that point? Once you made that decision, what was, how violent did you get? What was to what depth did you go in terms of violent crime?
Well, I did. I just started trying to accelerate the criminal behavior, which is all petty crime at the time. Again, strong arm robbery is a felony, but it's not one of the big crimes. And certainly going to prison for strong arm robbery, everyone looks at you like, what? Wait, yeah, we all commit strong arm robbery. That's how we get our drugs. It was like a low crime. I went and did a bunch of like stupid white collar crime for a long time, for a couple of years, 3 years or so. And then I went on the run once I was wanted in 5 different counties for bounce checks, ripping off people, different frauds. The strong arm felony was like my only violent offense that I was unwanted for. I went to Mexico for a couple months, and I got robbed in Mexico because I was introduced to the fact that even though I thought I was this ubermensch, Nietzschean criminal, I was a lame. I was just completely lame. I go over there. I'd collected $30,000 or something like that. And I ended up with $2,000. I didn't get physically robbed, but they came in my house and tore my house up. And every place where I'd hid money, they found it. They just saw me as a mark going down to Mexico, not knowing what I was doing, flashing money around maybe too much. So I needed money. And I was in Mexico and thinking, you know what? Pancho Villa used to come in the United States and rob post offices and banks. And then he would scoot back into Mexico. And I'm being Mexican. I'm thinking, you know what, man? Let me put on the bandido identity. Let me go to United States, and let me become a bank robber. That's what I'm gonna do. And so I elevated my game, and because my imagination was strong, because my volition is strong, because I could marshal my will when I needed to, and I was desperate for cash now. I could not go do what I had done before, which is in order to defraud people, you have to get near them. Having been a Christian, I knew how to make people believe that I was a certain way. I knew the language of society, polite society. So I could blend in, do my little frauds, and then burn people. But now I had $2,000. When you're a criminal, $2,000 is weekend change. So I needed to go make a lot of money. Bank robbery fit. So I ran in the United States. I robbed a bank. And I get caught on the way going into Mexico the next morning. The CHP put up and they stopped people at the border looking for stolen cars leaving the country. And not only was I in a stolen car, I was wanted in 5 different counties in Southern California. So I went to prison for 2 years with bank robbery under my belt. And so I thought for those 2 years, I kept thinking, when I get out, I'm going to rob banks. And in 1988, I came out. I took a month off because I wanted to go have some fun before I robbed my first bank, because I thought, I don't want to go back after the first robbery and never have had any fun. So I took a month off, had fun, and then I went on a 14-month bank robbery spree. There's a TV show called I Almost Got Away with It. And in the first season, on one of the episodes of that season, How I Almost Got Away with It, they interview the FBI agents, and they interview friends of mine, and they talk about my crime spree, whatever. So the FBI says that they think I committed between 30 or 40 bank robberies in that show. That's what they say. I eventually pled guilty to 3. I was caught twice. I was caught with a transmitter of the money in Southern California. And then I got made bail, and I went out and robbed more banks. So then they caught me finally when I was going to go give money to my girlfriend at UCLA. She turned me in, and they were waiting on the UCLA campus for me. And I put up a little fight, but they got me, and I went to prison I got an 8-year sentence, 8 years, 4 months, and I served 7 years, 1 month. And yeah, so the violence was that. That was it.
So let me ask you, Jokes. We're running out of time for the first half. What are you doing now that you're not a criminal anymore? What do you do now?
Yeah. Since I want to just address something real quick. When you said bad, I'm a bad boy and stuff. I go and do a lot of work in San Quentin with these men in there. My daughter I got an 11-year-old daughter, so I daddy. That's a big thing. I homeschool my daughter, but she would say, "Oh, you're going to go see the bad guys." And I said, "No, not all of them are bad guys. A lot of those guys they're all offenders, but a lot of them are like your dad. They have changed their life and they want to come to society. And our job as society is to remind them that we're here to help them figure it out. People, when I got out, they helped me. I came out, people said, "You're a bright guy. Why don't you write about some of this stuff?" I started writing op-eds very early. 3 months out, I got published in the LA Weekly, to the San Francisco Examiner, then the LA Weekly. 3 months after that, within 6 months out, I had a piece published in the LA Times. And I published in every major newspaper in the country except the New York Times. I've written for magazines and now doing television. I've written for television the last couple of years. I'm working on making a movie there. Last year I made friends in 2011. A writer in Hollywood said that he needed help with a film he was doing about a getaway driver, and so I met with him. I took him on to some of the banks where I got away from, and some of the banks I pled guilty to, and Santa Clarita and that kind of thing. Showed him my getaway stuff, and he ended up giving me a role in his movie Baby Driver this last year. So not only was I a tech consultant in that movie about a bank robbery getaway driver with Jamie Foxx and John Hamm and Kevin Spacey, I was actually also script consultant on that project. And then also I played, ironically, bank guard who gets killed by Jamie Foxx.
I remember that, yeah. And I remember when you came on Facebook, some of my Facebook followers remember you. Before I go, Joe, I do have to ask you one question. I noticed, I watched you on Facebook, you still like to come off a little bit of a tough guy persona. Am I reading that correctly?
No, what I would definitely say not tough guy, because actually I don't feel I'm a tough guy. What I come off as is in my writing is the voice of a man who comes from that space. So there is a persona of the guy who says no nonsense. I don't know if you read it. Well, you actually are a crime writer. So there's a voice that's like it's clipped, and it's aggressive and it's pushy and it's a little pugilistic. But if you really read it, there's always ideas there. It's not pose. It's not simple bravado. And as you know, if you follow me, more times than not, I mock myself. I mock my weight. I mock that kind of thing. So I don't. If I'm doing that sometimes at certain posts, it's not because I think I am, and I'm not trying to impress anyone. But there is a sort of a way in which sometimes I can speak with some clarity when I don't speak with my, LA Times voice, my elegant voice, whatever, but I have it a little bit more gritty, like I'm just coming to you from the prison tier. But that's not, I don't consider that like a tough guy thing, I think it's because I don't believe that for 2 seconds. That whole thing where I was trying to be all manly and macho, it was nonsense. It was underwritten by fear, So I really, in my heart, do not move in the world as a man who thinks, hey, look at how tough I am. I mock myself relentlessly.
I just had to take you up on that. One question here is coming in. We have a few minutes for you. Jim wants to know, what was your final decision, or what was the final fact that made you decide to change? Was it prison, or was it something you found within yourself?
No, it was what I always tell people. Solitary confinement. I was in there for almost 2 years under a homicide investigation with 6 other Mexican guys, and we were all cleared of it. It was somebody else who they didn't even arrest till 2 years later. But solitary confinement was the worst thing that ever happened to me, and also the best thing that ever happened to me. It created the occasion for me to give up. And one of the ways I gave up is I actually started struggling, started hearing voices. And I had up until that point thought I was such a smart, my brain was so sharp. And when I started hearing voices and I had a hallucination, that little bulb was in my cell, I rolled over and was like, oh, I'm gone. I'm like, I don't have any brain anymore. Like I can't tell the difference between fantasy and reality. And that was so starkly humbling. Now, I didn't tell anybody that when I was in prison. I still kept up a persona of the guy who could run with the fellas. But that humbled me to my core. It broke it, like I couldn't lie to myself anymore. I could lie to everybody, but I couldn't lie to myself. And that was actually crucial to get me to start writing stuff, because then I remembered, hey, I knew a 7-year-old boy who died of leukemia. That brought up that memory from when I was a kid, when I was still innocent, when my mom was still alive. And I started writing about that time, and I eventually turned myself into a writer based on 2 days after that hallucination. I started writing the stories of my childhood. It turned into a memoir. I got out, and I've been writing for the last 21 years.
Fantastic. Before we let you go, Howard, any observations for Joe? Any questions?
It's fascinating. I wish we could talk for another couple of hours to get to the, to some
of these issues. Maybe we'll have you guys on again. And Joe, the last thing, if your movie comes out, just remember, I'm a frustrated actor. Okay?
We all are.
I want a chance there.
Howard, reach out to me, man. We can have conversations. I'd love to talk to you more.
We will. All right. Let's stay in touch, buddy.
Sure.
All right, let's stay in touch. All right, everybody, what we're going to do, thanks, Joe. We're going to let Joe go. We're going to bring on another bad boy, as we say. Howard's going to stay with us and serve as my co-host tonight. So everybody, we're going to take a little break. And if you know from watching us, every time we get fancy with that technology, something goes wrong. So if anything goes wrong, hang in there. Max will get us back on. Thank you, Joe. Howard, stay with us, and we'll be back on in a few minutes, everybody. Thanks. right, officer down. Hi, everybody. Welcome back. Thanks for that quick break. Ralph, do we have you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Fantastic. Let me introduce you, everybody. And Howard, you're still there?
I'm here.
Oh, my goodness. Look at that, folks. We made a transition. I'm going to give Max a day off of that. All right, no technical problems here. All right, we have another bad boy with us, Ralph Griffith. Ralph, tell us a little bit about your childhood, what led you to a life of crime, and then tell us about your entree into crime.
Well, first of all, I'd like to say that I didn't have a bad family experience growing up, so I cannot blame my family for my introduction to the life of crime, okay? I know a lot of people like to try to enable or blame their family upbringing or drugs or alcohol on their behavior. In my experience, my family had nothing to do with it. Drugs had nothing to do with it, or alcohol. My father drank a lot when he was older. He never beat my mother up. He never got a DUI. He never got in trouble or made an ass out of himself at night. He went to work every day. And so I do not blame bad behavior on good whiskey or drugs or anything like that. I think it's an enabling, or this is my excuse for what I do. What I did was simply from the fact that, I thought I was a lot smarter than I was, and I did not believe in the value of creating a value in myself. I thought when I was younger, I was fairly attractive, and I thought I didn't have to really know anything. And bottom line was I had nothing to offer society. And I was actually, I don't want to be obscene on the show, but I was basically just an asshole,
That's all right. You get away with that one. That's all right.
Yeah. Okay.
But I want to jump in there for a second, Ralph. Howard, it's a little interesting what we hear here. Other than the difference in their family backgrounds, Ralph seems to be expressing a very similar concept to how Joe saw himself. Are you seeing that? Did you see that as a pattern in these decisions to go into a life of crime?
Well, I think it's interesting that you mentioned when you were younger that you were an attractive guy, and it sounds like some things probably came easy. The attention from the opposite sex, probably people wanting, to be your friend or wanting to, have you at the party. I mean, is that correct? I mean, is that a correct assessment?
Pretty much. Do you see the picture that's below the screen here?
Yes.
Okay. I'm 65 years old in that picture. Okay. It was probably a bad thing for me to be able to just show up and be able to get along, I was not developing skills, life skills, trades. I had a good friend, and he told me, he said, listen, if you do not go to school, work your way up in the company, learn a trade, by the time you're 30, you're going to be in trouble. And that's exactly what happened to me. I didn't go to prison until I was 33 years old, and for bank robbery. Okay.
Was that your first involvement, or was there a steady progression of crime up until that point? I'm kind of curious because a lot of people start aging out of crime when they're 35 as opposed to going to prison at 35.
Well, at that age, the only thing I knew how to do was spend money. I didn't know how to earn it. And
Okay.
what had been for me an easy way to get money. I was getting older and it wasn't coming easier. And so um, another bad thing is that I've
But
never
Ralph,
considered.
let me jump in there because Howard asked a question, and some people are asking the question online. What were you doing at the time? Were you committing low-level crimes, or how were you getting your money and leading your life at that point? In the younger years, let's say from your 20s, during the 20s, before you did the bank robbery.
I made my living, you might say, sort of like a gigolo, living off of women, using my charm and my looks. But really, it was a very shallow thing, and I regret it now. But at the time, it was just seemed like the easiest course to flow through. And another problem is that I have never thought of myself as a criminal. I know that sounds crazy, but I never thought of myself as a criminal. When I go to jail, I cannot stand the people that I'm in jail with. I always thought, well, I'm in jail because I needed money and I took a risk that was stupid to get money. But I never looked at myself as a criminal or thinking in the criminal mindset. I listened to the gentleman that was on before me, and he said that he had become involved and he looked up to the crime thing. I have never looked at it like that. To me, it was like I didn't want to do it, but I needed the money and I didn't have any other way that I thought at the time that I could get it. But I never thought of myself as a criminal. I've never been in a gang. I've never gotten a tattoo, even though I've spent 30 years in federal prisons for bank robberies. I have no tattoos on my body. I stayed to myself and I studied and read the whole time. And I really couldn't relate to the criminals. So I've lived in a really strange state in which I don't belong in polite society and I don't belong in the criminal society. I feel like I'm totally isolated from the whole world. I studied the last 15 years. All I do is read and I study, and I studied languages and computer programming and read all the classics. And I began writing 15 years ago. And I was hated by the criminals. I was hated by the inmates because they thought, well, he's being aloof because, there must be something. He must have done something that, he doesn't want anybody to know about. It wasn't that. I just couldn't stand the people. I didn't watch TV for 15 years. In the Federal Bureau of Prisons, you have to buy a radio to hear the television. They took the speakers out of the TVs. I never bought a radio. I had people try to give me a radio. I said, I don't want to listen to TV. I said, it's just mindless, And when I wrote this book, Monkey House, because of the 7 years I spent with Bernie Madoff, I had never watched the show Orange is the New Black. I didn't know about that show until I was in the halfway house last year. And my roommate, who was an electrical engineer of all things, he was addicted to the show and he would bring these CDs home. He says, you got to watch this. He read my book. And I watched it. It was about a girl named Piper that spent a year in a federal prison camp for drugs. And, it was kind of made up. And after the first year, Netflix didn't have really any information to go on. So they just started turning it into a soap opera. And he said, your show is this show on steroids because all the characters in my show were for real. And it was really a memoir, Monkey House. I didn't make anything up, even though it may seem really crazy. It was the truth.
Ralph, I want to ask you, because what got you to the prison was this bank robbery. And a question just came in here from the audience, because, both you and Joe beforehand both committed bank robberies. Excuse me, it was not the reason why we had you both on. That's kind of coincidental that you both did bank robberies. And they're saying here, you both seem like you're smart guys, you're articulate guys. Why did you both choose bank robberies? Is it the reason, as they say, that's where the money is? Or was it the simplicity of it? Or is there something more attractive about that, the power that you exerted? Why specifically did you go to a bank robbery, especially as Howard pointed out, even though 33 is young for us, at a life of a criminal is kind of old. What made you decide to do the bank robbery? And give us a little insight into your state of mind as you were thinking about that.
I told you, Mr. Taubman, I would never lie to any question you had. And this is the honest to God's truth. The reason I went into banks was not because that's where the money is. Because if you go in to rob a liquor store or you go in to rob a jewelry store, you're probably going to get your ass shot, okay? Generally, when you rob a bank, you don't have to even show a gun. It's kind of a non-violent crime, even though they classify it as violence. In other words, if you go in to rob a liquor store, there's a good chance that guy's going to have a gun under his cabinet. If you go in to rob a cannabis store where they have a lot of cash now, they're going to be armed. Banks, unless certain big banks will have an armed guard, but most banks don't. And the banking industry has changed over the years. They're phasing out bank tellers and they're not having a branch on every block like they used to. Now they're bigger and they're more secure. But it was basically a very easy thing to do without having to exhibit violence or a gun. I could do a whole bank takeover without a gun. And there was no violence. I've never hurt anybody. And that was the reason I chose that. I've known people that have robbed jewelry stores and armored cars and things like that. And you better have a gun if you're going to go into one of those kind of places and try to pull a robbery, because they are all armed. I know some really high-end jewelry stores. I'm from San Francisco, and the salesmen all have pistols on their hips. One is Shreve and Son, and it's in downtown San Francisco by Union Square. Their watches are $50,000, $100,000. I mean, there's millions and millions of dollars of jewelry and watches, and they are all armed, and they let you know it. So it was more of, I would call it a coward's way of pulling a robbery going into a bank.
Were you armed though? Did you have a weapon with you, or did you pretend to have a weapon?
I used a weapon a couple times, and then I realized that I didn't need it. It was just overkill. You don't need a gun, to go in the bank. You simply walk into a bank. They're instructed to give up the money.
Right. Well, let's not give a school on robbing banks here and give someone ideas out there. But let's not make it sound too easy.
From saying that myself.
Yeah, we're not giving schools here on robbing things. But Ralph, when you went in there with a gun, though, you're saying you weren't a violent person. Did you consider the fact that by bringing in a weapon or displaying the weapon, you're increasing the chances of having this violent confrontation?
No, what the weapon was basically for was not for the bank. It was for any heroes that might be in the bank, And I never planned on shooting anybody, but if they had the idea of they were going to try to follow me, I could pull it out.
But you recognize that you might force yourself in that situation where you'd have to shoot somebody, right?
Exactly.
So Howard, let me. I think Howard, can you jump in here? Because let's do a little analysis here on Ralph. I mean, here's a guy. He doesn't sound like he wants to be violent, right? He's doing good money. He doesn't sound like he's even at that stage, but yet he's putting himself in this situation. What's your observation on that, Howard?
Well, I had an opportunity to talk to Frank Abagnale years ago at length, and Frank just wanted the money, right? And he didn't want to hurt anyone either, and I understand that. I mean, it's a great place to get money. You understand what the bank's procedures are, and you take advantage of that. But I keep going back to the fact that the first one that you did was in your 30s, and certainly one of the things that happens, I think, to people as they're going through a development into a criminal career is that you can be a bad boy, and I think that's the theme of the show tonight. You can be a bad boy from the time you're in your teenage years into your 20s and maybe even to your late 20s. Girls think it's kind of exciting and daring to date a bad boy, and I think you can be on the scene, whatever that scene might be, bar scene, whatever social scene you might be in. And you can be just a bad boy up until a certain point. But I think as people get older, and that's why we see that people age out, is as you get older, it's not as cool a deal to be a bad boy. And so now you've got to decide, well, what am I going to do? I was a professional musician. I still play. And I know a lot of musicians like that, that they reach a certain age where, they're in their 30s, they're in, going into their 40s. They haven't had, $1 million hits, et cetera. So what do? How do you put a punctuation mark on your career development? And so, we certainly see this with people that are involved in crime, that, at some point it's just not as cool to be a bad boy. And so people start trying to, figure out an exit strategy. Obviously, your exit strategy was to, rob banks, get a lot of money, and continue, that lifestyle. And let's be fair. I mean, that can be a very attractive lifestyle, not working, having money, being in a very cool scene where there's a lot going on. And, it's just unfortunate that there's not an easy way to support, I think, being in a lifestyle like that. So, but that is interesting to me that was when it started. I mean, I understand why it would happen if we put that into, a larger context of the study of crime. I think it's great that you've, come out on the other end. And it sounds like to me that when you were in prison, that basically you had the attitude of, I'm amongst you, but I'm not one of you. And I think sometimes that's where there's some real strong survival qualities, I think, in having that approach. I mean, would you agree with that that's how you felt when you were in prison, that you were amongst the other people, but you really weren't one of them?
I think you did a pretty accurate and very quick analysis of my personality. Yes, indeed. And you mentioned you were a musician. I was involved in the music business too in the early 70s, the mid 70s. I didn't bring that up because, I know the show, we don't have that much time. But I truly, and this, I know this sounds crazy. I never thought of myself as a criminal, even when I was in prison. I said, I have nothing in common with these people. I mean, these guys are animals. And, but I had to deal with it. And I remember when I came in, I was like 34 years old and skinny. And I saw this thug trying to play the guitar. So I went over and I played some riffs for him, and he was really impressed. So he got me lifting weights and things, so that I could fit in, and look like because if you're not, you're subject to being a victim in prison. I was in Lompoc and when it was a USP back in the late 80s, early 90s, with Carmine Persico, by the way. He started off there, but I didn't know Carmine in Lompoc. I didn't meet Carmine until I got to FCI Butner. But before I could become a study and a scholar, as I like to call it, I had to develop a physical persona to keep people away from me. Because when people saw you with a book or if you were trying to study, they thought you were like a punk or a sissy or something. And so I had to be tough and fearsome looking before I could become a student. I actually went to college in Lompoc. Chapman University had an extension course through Vandenberg Air Force Base, and I was a business major there. And my college credits say nothing about being in prison, as Chapman University, which is pretty highly rated university. I also went to San Francisco State University as a Japanese major. I studied languages inside. Probably 12 hours a day I spent on languages, and the rest of the time I spent writing or doing other things. And I knew that I wouldn't be able to use any of the skills that I acquired, my legal skills. I was a law clerk for 7 years at FCI Butner. I'm a really good lawyer. Bernie helped me with financial engineering and the financial.
That being Bernie Madoff, right? Bernie Madoff, just for the audience, right?
I helped a man named Eduardo Masferrer, a Cuban that was had the largest minority-owned bank in the United States out of Miami, Hamilton Bank Corp. I would write press releases for him, and in return, it was quid pro quo. He taught me about the Financial Accounting Standards Board in the United States. So I developed, between Bernie and Mr. Masferrer, I developed a keen understanding of high finance and business in Wall Street and how they went about doing things. My law background, I hated criminal law. I actually studied patent law because I knew I was going to the Bay Area and I figured patent law would be better. But down inside, I knew that, my life is over as far as being part of the normal society because no company can hire me. I've spent 30 years in prison off and on for bank robberies, and I'm a liability. There's a liability with insurance companies in that if a company hires me, an ex-con, and I should hurt a fellow worker or a client, the liability would be awesome. And
no, Ralph, let me jump in for a second, if you don't mind, excuse me, because of time. Because I'm getting some questions here, and I want to bring it up because a lot of people are asking, about how you and the other guests, you kind of, I don't want to say rationalize, but draw a distinction. You don't see yourself in a certain light as a certain criminal. But let's go back to that question where you had the gun. Now you don't see yourself as a criminal at this point. You're doing it because the money is. But again, what if, to protect yourself, you had to use that weapon and hurt somebody? Would you then have a different perception of yourself?
You're absolutely right there. And actually, when I had a gun, it was not the same. I knew that. I know the difference between right and wrong, good and bad. Even if it's in my mind, if I've rationalized it's a self-defense mechanism, it is definitely wrong, and I know that. And
but were you willing to take that chance?
I thought I needed to take that chance. I really didn't, but I had a gun on me when I was arrested. I was in a taxi cab, and I heard them asking his 1040 where his location was. I could have used my gun and told him to shut up or whatever. I didn't pull it on him, and I surrendered when they, came upon me. I suppose somebody that was really, had no regard for other people's lives or something might have done that. But it still doesn't excuse my behavior. And because of that, I never get mad at people. I tell people I've been honest about my past, whether on LinkedIn or any kind of job interviews. I'm very honest. I get that out front. I always I call it putting your worst foot out first. Okay, this is the bad news about me, and I don't get mad at anybody because say, hey, our hands are tied. We can't hire you, our company policy. It's like when I go to parole board, they say, we're really impressed with what you've done, but our hands are tied, because we have to go by statistics. And statistics say that somebody that's been in prison for a long period of time will reoffend in a short period of time. And, insurance companies and actuaries, they do the same kind of bidding. With me, it's like, this might sound strange, but it's like being black. People, when you're black, they look at you and they prejudge you. And you have to kind of prove that you're not the stereotype. And it's the same with me. I know if people get to know me, they will appreciate me and like me. But at first, I know that they're going to be put off. When I was in last 7 years with Madoff, Bernie would give me his Wall Street journals and I'd save them and, because I thought they'd be a collector's item or I could use them for a promo for my book. And they never ever shook my house down because the staff knew that I wasn't causing any problems. They trusted me. I worked as a law clerk there for 7 years. But it takes time for people to get to know me. But if you don't know me, I don't expect somebody, if somebody came up with my record and I looked at them, I would be hesitant about dealing with them. And so I've never been angry at anybody about that. I created my own problems. You know, my problems, all the time I did in prison, was self-inflicted. And
that's
by
great.
accepting,
Excuse me, I think it's really important that you recognize that, which is probably a significant part of your rehabilitation, if I may use that word. But I want to ask you another question here before time runs out. There's a couple of people asking, how much was prison a part of your decision to go straight or stop the life of crime?
not that much.
Really?
Really.
It was more internal?
It was internal and physical. I also have a heart condition. That's how I ended up with Bernie for 7 years. FCI Butner is a medical facility. The BOP puts everybody that has what they call chronic medical conditions. I've had open heart surgery and I have a pacemaker. You slow down, you know, and I would like to say that it was just, I psychologically changed myself, but there's a physiological part too, in the fact that I can't run. I can walk for a couple miles, 5 miles, but I can't run 100 yards. I can't fight. I can't do anything, you know. And I knew that the only way I could survive is with my mind. And that's why I studied languages, law, and computer programming and writing. But writing was my really joy. That's how I lived. When I first went back to prison, I was very suicidal. I thought, everybody has one novel within. I had heard that. And I wrote my first novel. And I was amazed that I actually completed it. Of course, it was total garbage. But the fact that I did it, you know, even if it was a bad novel, I mean, how many people can say they wrote a novel, you know, even if it was bad?
No, I agree with you. You know, my books aren't exactly New York Times bestsellers, but I wrote them, and they're there. You know, and it's a good feeling. I have to interrupt you, so I want to get Howard's thoughts on this. Howard, listen to the personalities that we have of these two different, you know, criminals. They clearly, you know, men of deep thought. You know, they're thinking men. They want to improve their education. And do you think, Howard, that's the reason why they're now reformed criminals and not continuing a life of crime? Do you see something in common with these two guys?
Well, yeah. I mean, if you just use two simple categories, you know, instrumental criminals and expressive criminals, you know, people who get involved in instrumental crime, bank robbery, fraud, you know, those kinds of things tend to be people who think a lot more about what they're doing. There's certainly a lot of planning, you know, that goes into most of the types of crimes that they commit. And so I think you have an opportunity with people who have gone in that direction, you know, to help them to rehabilitate themselves, you know, through education and through reading and through being involved in, you know, intellectual pursuits. If you have you know, people who are involved in, you know, what we call expressive crimes, violent types of crimes, I think it's a much more difficult road to go.
Yeah. Okay, we got the last minute. I'm going to give the Ralph, last second. Tell us about your book and where people can find it.
Well, Monkey House is a book, a memoir of my 7 years with Bernie Madoff, Jonathan Pollard, Carmine Persico, head of the Colombo crime family, Nicky Scarfo, who was very big in Atlanta, serial killers, crazy people. It would be a combination of watching Orange is the New Black and One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest on steroids. But I have another book coming out on Madoff that's going to be serious, and I probably should have released that one first.
No.
I'm going to...
we'll get you back on.
Yeah. And anyway, I thank you for allowing me on your show, and I hope you got a lot of hits on this. I've contacted a lot of people with this, and I want to ask all my friends that are watching this show, and even just connections on social media that are watching this show, to please subscribe to Mr. Taubman's show, because this guy is for real. And I think this show is going to go really big, you know, and please subscribe to it. And
thank you very much. I appreciate that, and I appreciate you having friended me on social media. I've enjoyed our conversations. Let's keep them up. Let's stay connected, and maybe do this again. All right.
Let's see what we have. Our results tomorrow.
All right, buddy. Thank you, Howard. Thank you for co-hosting with me. I appreciate your great insight into what we discussed tonight. Thank you very much. Everybody, thank you so much. Our guests were great tonight. We had a really good audience. Sorry we couldn't get to all the questions. That's a good sign, though. That means we're having a good conversation going on. And we will see you next week. We'll put out some communication about what's coming up next week. Again, as Ralph said, please go to YouTube and subscribe, and please spread the word. I'm Michael Tabman, Crimes and Times. Thank you and good night.